My name is Ethan Miller, and I never thought I'd be telling a story like this. I mean, people hear about these things all the time, strange occurrences in the middle of nowhere, but they never think it could happen to them. At least, I didn't. I grew up in a small town, nothing remarkable about it. You know the type, one main street, a couple of diners, everyone knows everyone's business. My family had been on the same farm for generations. It wasn't a big operation or anything, just enough to get by. My parents ran it before me, and when they got older, I took over. After my dad passed, it was just me, my wife, Lily, and our daughter, Emma. Emma's 6, smart as a whip. She loves running around outside, picking flowers, and helping with the animals. Lily, she was always more of a city girl, but she learned to love the quiet. We all did. At least we did until last summer. It was late July, a dry spell had hit, and we were just about to start harvesting early. I remember that day so clearly because it started out perfectly normal. It was hot, like scorching hot, and I was out in the fields by noon. I was checking the irrigation when I saw something weird. There were tracks, but not animal tracks, not the usual deer or stray dogs you'd sometimes see. These were big, almost like human footprints, but too wide, too heavy. They led from the edge of the field and disappeared into the corn. I'm not one to get spooked easily, so I didn't think too much of it at the time. I figured maybe some hunter had wandered onto the land by mistake, and that was that. But when I got back to the house that evening, Lily told me she'd seen someone standing at the edge of the yard earlier, said it was a man, just standing there staring at the house. I asked her why she didn't come get me, but she shrugged it off, saying he was gone before she could. We had the occasional stranger passing through, so I didn't press it. But I should have. That night we were sitting on the porch after dinner. Emma was inside watching a movie, and Lily and I were just enjoying the quiet when we heard this sound. It was faint at first, like something dragging across the ground. It was coming from the barn. Now our barn was old, built by my granddad's hands. Sturdy, but it creaked. I'd been meaning to fix it up, but, well, you know how those things go. I stood up and grabbed my flashlight, telling Lily to stay put. As I walked toward the barn, the dragging sound stopped. I called out, "Who's there?" But all I got in return was silence. The kind of silence that makes your skin crawl. When I reached the barn, I shone the light inside and nothing. No one. The animals were fine, everything was in its place. So I headed back to the porch, trying not to think much of it. But Lily, she was on edge. She didn't say anything, but I could tell by the way she kept glancing over her shoulder that something had unsettled her. The next few days, things started to feel off. It was little things at first, like tools going missing from the shed or strange noises outside at night. But then Emma, God, this part still gets me. Emma started talking about the man in the corn. One morning she was sitting at the kitchen table eating cereal when she casually mentioned that she saw a man standing in the cornfield the night before. Said he was just watching the house. I asked her what he looked like, but she couldn't describe him. Just said he was tall, wearing dark clothes, and he never came closer. I didn't want to scare her, so I told her it was probably just her imagination. But deep down, I knew it wasn't. Something about the way she said it. It was too real. Kids don't lie about things like that. That night I made sure all the doors were locked, checked the windows, even grabbed the old shotgun I kept in the closet just in case. I didn't believe in ghosts or any of that nonsense, but the idea of someone, some stranger, watching my family, that chilled me to the bone. Around 2 a.m. I woke up to the sound of footsteps on the porch. Slow, deliberate footsteps. My heart was pounding in my chest as I grabbed the shotgun and crept to the window. I peeked through the curtains and there, standing at the edge of the yard, was a man, just like Emma had said. He wasn't doing anything, just standing there facing the house. It was too dark to see his face, but I could tell he was watching us. I flicked on the porch light, and as soon as I did, he turned and walked into the cornfield, disappearing into the rows of stalks like he was never there. I don't know why, but I didn't chase after him. Maybe it was the way he moved, slow, unhurried, like he had all the time in the world. Maybe it was because I had Emma and Lily to think about. Either way, I stayed put. The next morning I called the sheriff. He came out, took a look around, but there wasn't much he could do. No footprints, no sign of anyone being there. He told me it was probably just some drifter passing through, maybe a homeless guy looking for a place to stay, but that didn't sit right with me. A few days passed without incident, but then one evening, just as the sun was setting, Emma came running into the house, terrified. She said the man was back, standing in the same spot in the field. I grabbed the shotgun again and ran outside, but, of course, there was no one there, just the corn swaying in the breeze. That night I barely slept. I stayed up, sitting by the window, watching the fields, waiting, but nothing happened. The next morning, Lily and I talked about packing up and leaving for a bit, maybe going to stay with her sister in town just to get away. But before we could, things took a turn for the worse. It was a Wednesday. I remember because Lily had gone into town for groceries and I was alone with Emma. She was playing out back while I was fixing the tractor. I wasn't paying close attention when I suddenly realized it had gotten eerily quiet. I called out for her, but she didn't answer. Panic set in as I dropped the wrench and ran toward the house. That's when I saw her, standing at the edge of the cornfield, staring into the rows. I ran to her, shouting her name, but she didn't move. When I reached her, I grabbed her shoulders and spun her around, asking what she was doing. And she just looked up at me, her little face pale as a sheet, and whispered, "He's here." I didn't need to ask who she meant. I scooped her up, ran back to the house, and locked every door, every window. I called Lily, telling her to come home right away. That night I sat in the living room with the shotgun across my lap, waiting for something to happen, for him to show up again. But he didn't. And after that day, we never saw him again. We sold the farm a few months later, moved into town, and I haven't been back since. But sometimes, late at night, when it's quiet and the world feels still, I think about that man, about the way he stood there, watching. I don't know who he was or what he wanted, but I do know one thing. He wasn't just passing through. He was waiting for something, or someone. When you've lived on a farm your whole life, you get used to certain things. The creak of the barn door in the wind, the sound of cows lowing in the night, even the occasional blackout when a storm rolls through. I never thought any of it could scare me. But there's one night I'll never forget. And it changed everything. My name's Dan Miller. I run a small farm out here in eastern Nebraska, just me, my wife Jenny, and our two boys, Luke and Ben. We've been here for years now, managing the crops, raising the animals, living the quiet life. You wouldn't think anything strange could happen out here, miles away from the nearest neighbor. But last October, something did. It started like any other fall evening. The sky was turning that rich orange and purple that only happens at the end of the harvest season. Jenny was finishing up in the kitchen, and I was out in the barn feeding the horses. Luke and Ben were in the yard, kicking around a soccer ball like they usually do after dinner. I'd just finished cleaning up when the first odd thing happened. The horses, Sally and Duke, got real skittish all of a sudden. They're usually calm, but that night their ears were twitching and they were pacing around like they could sense something I couldn't. I shrugged it off, thinking maybe it was just the cold breeze picking up or a coyote nearby. Nothing I hadn't dealt with before. I finished up in the barn and headed back toward the house, but as soon as I stepped outside, everything went quiet. Not the usual quiet you get out in the country, but a dead silence. No crickets, no wind rustling through the corn, not even the sound of the boys laughing like they usually do. I called out to them, but they didn't answer. That's when I noticed something. There was a figure standing near the edge of the cornfield, barely visible in the dim light. At first I thought it was Luke or Ben playing a trick on me. They're always trying to spook me, especially around Halloween. But when I called out again, the figure didn't move. It just stood there, still as a statue, facing the corn. I walked over, feeling more annoyed than scared at that point, but as I got closer, I realized it wasn't either of my boys. It was a man, tall, wearing a long, dark coat, and standing just a few feet from the corn's edge. I stopped in my tracks, suddenly unsure of what to say. "Hey," I called, trying to sound firm but not too aggressive. "You lost or something?" The man didn't respond. He didn't even turn around. He just stood there, his back to me, like he was waiting for something. I took a step closer, the hairs on the back of my neck standing up. "I asked you a question," I said louder this time. Nothing. By now my heart was starting to race. It wasn't normal, this kind of silence. People don't just show up unannounced out here in the middle of nowhere. I was about to step forward again when I heard it. The faint sound of footsteps behind me. I spun around, expecting to see Luke or Ben, but there was no one. The yard was empty, the barn doors were shut, and the house was dark, darker than it should have been. "Jenny," I called, feeling a lump form in my throat. Still nothing. I turned back to the figure at the cornfield, but now he was gone. Vanished, just like that. I didn't hear him move, didn't see him slip away into the corn. He was just gone. I ran back to the house, my mind racing, trying to make sense of what I'd just seen. When I got inside, Jenny was standing at the kitchen sink, staring out the window. She hadn't heard me come in. "Jenny," I said softly, not wanting to startle her. She turned slowly, her face pale. "Dan, did you see him too?" I felt a chill run down my spine. "Who?" "There was a man," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Out by the corn. He was just standing there." My stomach dropped. I hadn't told her what I'd seen, but somehow she knew. "Yeah," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I saw him." For the next hour, we didn't say much. I checked on the boys. They were fine, asleep in their room, blissfully unaware of what was happening. I wanted to believe it was just some drifter passing through, maybe someone from town who'd had too much to drink and wandered onto our property. But something about it didn't sit right with me. Around midnight, I heard the sound again. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate, right outside our bedroom window. I sat up in bed, listening, my heart pounding. Jenny was already awake, clutching the blanket, her eyes wide. "I hear it too," she whispered. I grabbed the flashlight from the nightstand and crept to the window. The footsteps stopped. I hesitated, my hand on the curtain, unsure if I really wanted to look, but I had to know. I pulled it back slowly, shining the flashlight into the yard. And there he was, the same man standing in the exact same spot by the cornfield, only this time, he was facing the house. I couldn't move. My body was frozen with fear. His face, it was blank, emotionless, like he wasn't really there at all. But his eyes, they were locked on me, cold and unblinking. I don't know how long I stood there, staring back at him. It could have been seconds, it could have been minutes. But eventually, he turned, slowly walking back into the corn, disappearing without a sound. That was the last time we saw him. The next morning the power came back on, and everything seemed normal again. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still out there, watching us, waiting for the right moment to come back. We never did figure out who or what that man was. But we sold the farm a few months later, and I've never looked back. To this day, I still get chills every time I drive past a cornfield at night, wondering if he's still out there, waiting for someone else to notice him.